Fuck it, we live. I'm gonna get into this shit, and like I said, just let me know. I may drop, especially if Bree come in, with a bunch of noise and shit. But wait, let me get the fucking document here. So today I wanted to kind of, do I have a echo on my shit, or am I? Okay, all right, maybe I'm just tripping. So yeah, today, damn, what the fuck it is? A little bleed. What the fuck is going on here? All right, yeah, we're gonna get into this live, but I gotta see what the fuck is happening here. Why is shit? Like Nvidia's tripping, but Apple is not. Is the heat map red? All right, fuck it. Either way, I grabbed the 767 spot put in case this shit goes. Not for tomorrow. It's $27. I got in at 26, I believe. If it failed me, because you know how this bullshit do. You think you failed and it don't. All right, well I'm in. Okay, so now to get to the lesson. I'm still tripping on why is my mic sounding like an echo. All right, fuck it. All right, so today we're gonna touch on the one drop rule, and this would apply to somebody like Bree, maybe not apply to them, but it would be educational or beneficial for them. Um, a lot of times, in our ignorance, black folks might be trying to challenge other niggas' blackness. You ain't black enough. And in 2025, you might be too black. I don't know. But the long and short, you have to, we're going to cover the concepts of family trees in America. A lot of niggas there's going to be at least one white person in that tree somewhere. And this is how you got terms like mulatto, quadroon, octoroon. If you was your peoples was enslaved in Central and South America, these terms might be mestizo, mestiza, and other, Spanish equivalents of those terms. So, so a lot of people get things wrong when they hear the one drop rule. You're black. That's correct from multiple levels. So the law didn't actually take place during slavery. It took place after slavery ended. And it was mostly in the Jim Crow era. So in the late 1800s, coming into the early 1900s, Virginia, they had the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which was clearly one of the strongest examples of this one drop rule. If you had any non-white in you, you were black legally, no questions asked. So, um, once again, going back to modern day 2026, and you see plenty of brothers and sisters that might be light skinned, high yellow, almost damn near white, they still black, regardless of how minuscule that amount is. And when you try to deny them their blackness, you disrespecting their ancestors, and you also disrespecting your ancestors. But anyway, during slavery itself, the system worked a little differently, and it's more disturbing when you learn more about it. The law was called Partus Secutor Ventrum, which was Latin for that which is born follows the womb. So that means that the child's status, free or enslaved, is followed by the mother's status. So if the mother was black, that child was black. So when we think about, all these different scenarios with the overseer, violating, the black slave woman, that child might come out damn near white looking, but because the mother was black, that child was still black technically, and legally that child was going to be a lifelong slave depending on the period of time that they were born into, clearly. You know what I'm saying? So that means that white men who fathered children with black women, enslaved black women, no matter how much white blood that child had, half, three quarters, it doesn't matter. If the mother was a slave, then the child was going to be born enslaved. That child would never be a legitimate heir of the white father and receive none of the assets that the white father owned. Point blank, period. And then, of course, to kind of go back over these terms, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, basically means half, 1/4, or 1/8, as far as percentage of black that you might have in you. You can go further down to, I think, quintaroon, which is 1/16, but we ain't gonna get that deep on it. So anyway, after slavery ended, this one drop rule got formalized into strict law. Um, and this was used to enforce segregation, basically. You know what I'm saying? Also to deny people rights, keep the racial hierarchy intact. So just to get that one drop thing out the way, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. So now I wanted to kind of go just to a couple of key instances where this same concept is going to be looked at, but in the opposite, like where instead of if you got to drop a black and you black, they was trying to erase all traces of blackness. So in Australia, they had an actual government policy with the name breeding out the color. This shit is in the historical record. So after British colonization began in 1788, Aboriginal Australians faced frontier massacres, disease, and mass displacement from their land. But the part that gets erased from the story is what came next, a deliberate, decades long assimilation or extermination policy, however you want to look at it, that targeted mixed race Aboriginal children specifically. So, from roughly the 1910s to the 1970s, Australian authorities forcibly removed mixed race children from their families, and this is now known as the stolen generations. The goal wasn't hidden. A.O. Neville, a Western Australian chief protector of Aborigines, said the quiet part out loud. The explicit aim was to breed aboriginality out of the population over generations. Take the children, remove them from Aboriginal culture and community, push into marriage with the white population, and within a few generations, quote unquote, solve what they call the Aboriginal problem by erasing it biologically. So, this ain't a fringe reading of history. Australia's own 1997 government report, Bringing Them Home, documented this policy in detail. Official government intent, official government records, official government apology decades later. This is what state sponsored erasure actually looks like when it's not hidden. It's written down, defended in policy documents, and enacted for over half a century. Understanding this matters because lightening a population isn't always violence in a single moment. Sometimes it's a slow bureaucratic process executed over generations aimed at making entire people disappear without ever calling it what it was. So I'm gonna let y'all marinate on that for a minute. They literally tried to exterminate these people by just breeding them out of existence. Now, when we flip back to America to go off track for a minute, and you look at these NFL players, how we talked about this in the Discord too. A lot of NFL players, these white women are forced onto them a lot of times. Whether it's they leave the hood, they go to that prep school where they might be one of the only black people there in that environment, or when they get to the actual college environment, them white girls are gonna be funneled to them. You could look at the fucking any NFL pitches of any team damn near, and you're gonna see the shit is self evident. But anyway, moving on to example number two, Dominican Republic, aka I know black, I Dominican. And I'm saying it with my whole chest. So we're gonna touch on specifically the Parsley Massacre and anti-Haitian. I can't even say that, anti-Haitianismo, but you get the drift of whatever it's trying to say. So in 1937, a Dominican dictator ordered the killing of thousands of dark-skinned people at his border, and in the same era pushed for European immigration to replace them. That's not two separate stories, that's one policy. So Rafael Trujillo ruled the Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1961. In October 1937, he ordered what's now known as the Parsley Massacre, where Dominican soldiers killed an estimated 9,000 to 20 plus thousand Haitians and dark skinned Dominicans near the Haitian border. The name comes from the test soldiers used. They hold up a sprig of parsley and ask people to say the word for it in Spanish. Haitian Creole speakers struggled with the rolled R, and that pronunciation decided who lived and who didn't. So when you hear that, niggas couldn't roll that R, bah, 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 bah. That's what it was. Is foul, is blatant, but that's how the fuck you need to receive this shit that I'm giving. You know what I mean? Because that's how dirty these Dominicans did the darker parts of their population along with their neighboring Haitians on the border. So to go further with it, this wasn't random violence. It was tied to Trujillo's broader ideology of anti-Haitianismo. You know, I know I butchered that, but who give a fuck? A state project built on downplaying the Dominican Republic's African ancestry, promoting whiteness as a national identity, and treating Haitian and dark skinned Dominican populations as a threat to be reduced. Alongside the massacre, Trujillo's government encouraged European immigration to reshape the population. So, for the decades long time that in my lifetime that I've always heard this, you know, I know Black Eyed Dominican, you get in the actual historical background on why people might think like that and talk like that and behave like that. So on one hand, as an outsider to their culture, the Black Americans might be like, yeah, y'all some cool niggas, which is true from our viewpoint, but from their viewpoint, the darker Dominicans who survived going through this shit were literally probably programmed, obviously, like niggas in America are programmed to self hate, which is why we kill each other and all that wild shit. But that's a whole different, you know, thing. But at the same time, they were also programmed to self hate, which is why they are quick to say, I know black, I'm Dominican. The shit would make perfect sense to not only the people who were fresh, you know, surviving this fucking massacre scenario, the grandparents done put that teaching and ideology into their children and vice versa, going down the line from that shit. Factored in as the shit is breaking down with continued white immigration where you already have an existing racism, you already have an existing colorism, all of this shit swirling together to where these niggas don't want no parts of being black. So anyway, this didn't end with the dictator's assassination in 1961. Decades later, the Dominican Republic stripped citizenship from Dominican born people of Haitian descent, leaving tens of thousands stateless a legal bureaucratic continuation of the same project, just without the machetes. So the government still was on their fuckery, which seems like it gives more validity to why they would move, how they moving and behave how they moving, you know what I mean, from our viewpoint. So a massacre plus an immigration policy that happened at the same time by the same government with the same ideology isn't a coincidence. It's a whitening campaign with two tools being used instead of one: violence to remove and immigration to replace the darker population that has been removed. So now on to example number three, which this one should be fresh on a lot of y'all minds, especially with the World Cup games and all that shit. Argentina. So Argentina in the early 1800s, Buenos Aires was about a third black. Today, Argentina is one of the whitest countries in Latin America and barely acknowledges it ever had a significant Afro descendant population at all. This didn't happen by accident. You know what I mean? This shit was planned. So Argentina's whitening wasn't one massacre, it was multiple tools working together over decades. Afro Argentine men were disproportionately sent to the front lines of wars during the 19th century, including the war with Paraguay, resulting in devastating casualties concentrated in the black population. Disease epidemics like the 1871 yellow fever outbreak hit black neighborhoods in Buenos Aires the hardest. At the same time, the Argentine government ran on the explicit motto Gobernar es poblar. To govern is to populate. This is a state policy that subsidized mass European immigration specifically to reshape the national population's racial makeup. And on top of that, the state encouraged intermarriage, pushing Afro descendant and indigenous women toward European immigrant men. A direct biological whitening strategy played out generation by generation. So the result of this, the combined effect, you have a population that was demonstrably, it was basically way more white than it was from the 1800s. And on top of that, from a PR standpoint, they denied ever having a black population to begin with, which is to this day they are taught that the country didn't have a black history or a black population in a way that Brazil takes pride in its black population and celebrates the black culture of the population there. So the erasure that happened in Argentina wasn't natural. It was through policy, war, disease, and engineered marriage or intermarriage working together over generations. This whitening campaign was executed so thoroughly that its own citizens don't know what happened. So now to jump to the next thing, I want to cover the history of skin bleaching. Now, you look up some shit, it'll try to tell you, oh, people been skin bleaching for centuries. Fuck out of here. There's a difference between how people in ancient times was doing that shit versus how it's been done under post-slavery in a white supremacist framework. So we're gonna hop on into this shit. So there's a $31 billion global industry today built on convincing people that their natural skin isn't good enough. And the paper trail on how that industry actually started, it's not hidden. It's sitting in old magazine ads. government records, and even the will of one of the most famous black entrepreneurs in history. So before there was ever a bottle to sell, there was a hierarchy to sell it into. Under slavery, skin tone determined how you were treated. Lighter skinned enslaved people were disproportionately given house labor over field labor, and that difference in treatment planted a status hierarchy that outlasted slavery itself. After emancipation, the hierarchy didn't disappear, it hardened into things like blue vein societies and informal color based tests for entry into certain black social institutions, otherwise known as the fucking paper bag test. So we're gonna move on. By the early 1900s, skin lighteners hit the mass market, and these were usually marketed as freckle waxes or skin bleaches. They became some of the most popular cosmetics in the world, and consumers included white, black, and brown women. But for the black and brown consumers living under segregation and colonialism, this wasn't just cosmetic. Even slight differences in skin tone carried real political and social consequences. Access to jobs, treatment in public, sometimes physical safety. So here's where it gets more complicated than a simple story of white companies exploiting black consumers. Madam C.J. Walker, one of the first black self made millionaires in America, built her empire specifically supplying black women with hair and skin products. And she refused to sell skin bleach. She said her products were for the health and self esteem of women who worked with their hands and not for changing what they look like. So, you got to commend that. But the second she died in 1919, her own company released a skin bleaching product called Tan Off. The market pressure was strong enough to override her last, dying wishes. And of course, she wasn't able to stop it because she was gone. So by the time of the 1920s is where this gets undeniable. Skin bleachers and hair straighteners made up to 30% or 30 to 50% of all advertisements in the black press during those decades. And to stop for a second, if you go back and watch that old Malcolm X movie, you'll see what they're talking about. Now he didn't use no skin lightener, but he did use some hair straightener in the scene where he's in the barbershop and his hair is burning. So anyway, back to the script. So these products often contain, harmful chemicals which would suppress melanin, and used daily they could cause severe skin damage and even death at high doses. So one anthropologist at the time literally described light-skinned black Americans as a near-white intermediate race who might escape their Negro past, and the ads weren't selling beauty for beauty's sake. They were explicitly selling a better job, a better marriage, access to my modernity. Yeah, they were basically selling a better life, low key, however you want to, interpret that. So the message wasn't about looking prettier. The message was your survival and mobility in this country are tied to how light you can make your skin. And this wasn't always, a subtle exploitation. Sometimes it was calculated, on paper. One advertiser, Dorothy Dignam, ran ads for a skin bleach called Natanola that was sold heavily to black consumers, while the advertising itself leaned entirely on Old South plantation imagery, magnolias, hoop skirts, explicitly trying to also capture white buyers while completely erasing any hint of who was actually buying the product. That's not accidental. That's a company deliberately running two different racial narratives on the same product at the same time for profit. In 1971, Unilever launched Fair and Lovely into South Asia, a product line that would run for nearly 50 years. My bad. That same year, Kenya's newly post colonial government banned an entirely different skin lightening ad campaign, calling it an insult to the dignity of Africans. And then the same year, one former colonial powers company pushing the product into a new market, one newly independent nation banning it outright. The contrast tells you this was never inevitable, it was always a choice made differently by different people with different amounts of power. By the 1950s and 60s, American consumers started pushing back on the word bleaching itself. So companies didn't stop selling the product, they renamed the product. Bleach became lighten. Bleach and glow became ultra glow. Same chemical function, softer word. That pattern repeats all the way to 2020 when Fair and Lovely became Glow and Lovely. The name changed and the market didn't disappear. So this is one grand coordinated anti-blackness agenda. The honest answer is it didn't need to be. Slavery and colonialism built the hierarchy already. Capitalism just found that hierarchy and monetized it. Sometimes through white owned companies running explicit dual race manipulation, sometimes through black owned companies too. Multiple systems, multiple errors, multiple continents, all converging on the same outcome, a global industry that still profits today off the idea that dark skin needs to be fixed. So that's all I got for y'all for this one. And I'll catch y'all on the next one. God damn.